If you are unaware, it looks like within the next couple days, TikTok in the U.S. may be no more. That's more of a people call it a ban, but it's more of a blocking than anything else. They have to remove it from the app stores. Different network carriers have to be able to block the IP and the domains and traffic going to and from. Kind of a community effort to remove TikTok.
That's this coming Sunday, isn't it?
This coming Sunday, the 19th.
Oof.
So the interesting thing that I've seen around this is, like in the book FAIK, I talk about the fact that anybody that is sufficiently motivated will get around some kind of control, if it's like an algorithmic control. So one of the examples that I give is that Snapchat will notify a user if you've taken a screenshot of their posts. And so teenagers have realized that they can just grab somebody else's phone and use their camera and take a picture of the phone with that post. And of course, that doesn't notify anybody. Similar things happening with TikTok. There are people that in anticipation of the 19th have been saying, well, if you don't want me to have TikTok, I'll just jump off and I'll go to the equivalent app that is owned and run in China, and is, their name is translated Red Note, or even more accurately, Little Red Book, which I think is ironic in a lot of ways when you understand what Little Red Book traditionally can mean in China.
Yeah, why don't you explain that? Because I know a tiny bit about it, but what Little Red Book is a reference to a specific piece of literature, right? That's like a little bit troubling.
It is. Well, and when you think about the tension between U.S. and China around technology, and specifically TikTok, people are afraid of the political and the propaganda fallout of how China could potentially influence U.S.-based minds. And when we talk about the way that China is perceived, we always think about capitalism in the U.S. versus communism in China or some other parts of the world. Red is associated with communism for a variety of reasons. But when we talk about Little Red Book, that is actually a book that has been very, very popular in China for a long time because it was required to be popular. There is the Little Red Book that is the sayings of Chairman Mao. And if you go look it up, what you'll see is that it's kind of these aphorisms, these little pithy sayings, but there is a propaganda purpose for everybody in China having those. It is seeding the ideas that matter to the Chinese government within the minds of the people through these really easy to understand and remember aphorisms. And I think that when you look at the people in the U.S. who are banning TikTok, they have to be feeling a little bit helpless when they're seeing people from the U.S. jump from something that we did have a little bit of control over, at least, to the thing that is the unfettered, quote unquote, Little Red Book propaganda machine. And that's like the epitome of irony.
Yeah.
Is the way that I think about it.
So like what, T-minus 10 seconds until that one gets blocked, right? Surely if the whole concern was over China having influence over people in the U.S. and data from the litany of sensors you have on your smartphone of people in the U.S., surely you're not going to be able to keep accessing the Chinese version of TikTok, right? Or are you?
I don't know. Does it at some point turn into whack-a-mole? Do they just keep... in the Apple App Store, it would be harder for it to turn into whack-a-mole because of the processes that apps have to go through to get approved. Google Play Store could be a little bit harder to tamp down. But then also just, can you block every potential IP address and domain that might be supporting that? If the app starts to work, people can navigate to website X that's up this week.
Yeah, like technologically enforcing a ban like this is a little bit futile in that regard, right? And I mean, this whole saga of banning TikTok is interesting to me, and I have not been as plugged into it as perhaps I should have been, because it seems to me like the threat was overblown a bit from TikTok specifically. It kind of seemed as though that was a bit of a scapegoat, because like there's loads of apps that we use on our phones that are owned by other countries that presumably are collecting a ton of data on us that could be used in malicious ways as well. But we really focused on TikTok because of cultural issues with, the kids using it and the kind of content there, and like the China scare at the like. What are your thoughts on, is this like banning TikTok even remotely a smart thing to do or even try to do? Like,
yeah, I understand some of I understand where people are coming from with some of the concerns, right? Because TikTok is being targeted because of the explosive growth that they've had, which means that they have a really, really high amount of U.S.-based attention economy focused at, eyeballs on screens. There's a lot of that. It is very highly addictive for people that use it. And the algorithm can be pushed and shaped to start to become something that would further a propaganda point that you might want to make. So if you think that the U.S. is trying to stop Chinese-based propaganda or influence on a generation or a certain people group, then you can start to understand it. The other thing is that TikTok and a lot of apps in general, especially social media apps, collect a ton of data and also have access to things like geolocation and preferences, the things you're interested in. I would assume that you could do a data study of the videos that somebody watches, and you could get a really good personality profile on that person, what some of their likes and dislikes are, probably to a point that it would be shocking for that person to read the amount of intelligence that could be derived from that.
But that's true.
So I think that's
so many
that's true
apps.
of any social media. Yeah. But the difference here is that we're in the U.S. and we see China as a political and economic foe in a lot of ways. Even though we have trade agreements with China, there is an ideological, geopolitical, and economic concern that China really has the intention to come in and eat our lunch in a lot of ways. It's very clearly stated. And has been for several years, where China is intending to go as a geopolitical force and to replace the U.S. in a lot of those kinds of standings. And so the U.S. is afraid of that. I think of this like any mobile program. If you have a bad actor, and if we'll give the U.S. the leeway of saying that in their mind China is a bad actor. If you give a bad actor access to somebody's location, their trajectory, their personal tastes, the way that they behave, the people that they hang around, because we understand that your app is on somebody's phone that's next to somebody else's app that may be of a certain persuasion or have a certain political role. So now we can see when people cluster together, when they move apart. All of that becomes a really good intelligence resource. And I don't think that they want to just hand China the ability unfettered to have that kind of intelligence resource operate in the U.S.
The idea of banning it is kind of like a mainline right up front, very blatantly owned by China and massively popular thing. So I can see why it would get the brunt of the attention. I can't help but think that this ban isn't really going to achieve anything.
I think it'd be interesting to see what the effect is if they get shut down on the 19th and somebody doesn't swoop in and do something heroic, like buy it or come up with a plan, or somebody put a stay on that from a legal perspective. But assuming they get banned, if the effect of that is that people that want TikTok just jump over to the mainland China version of the app, the U.S. has kind of lost that argument at that point.
I mean, completely.
And clearly people have the sympathy for the Chinese app. And what I've seen is that people in the U.S. have been feeling very welcomed on that platform. There was something really interesting that happened to me last week on TikTok too, is that as I was scrolling through my TikTok feed, there were lots of things that seemed to be pro-China popping up in my feed. of like tourists that went to China, and they were in awe of the architecture and how nice everybody was and how clean everything was. And it was just video after video of that normally wouldn't have been on my feed. So I was wondering if it was people like me that caused that trend to happen, normal Americans, and they're just interested in China, or if maybe the Chinese government or ByteDance kind of turned up that in order to hopefully, in their mind, influence the way that Americans perceive China and TikTok and ByteDance and whatever other apps or companies may be associated with that.
Yeah, they put their thumb on that scale a little bit. I mean, do you voraciously consume other travel content particularly or anything like that?
No, that's what was so weird about it is it, like 6 or 7 videos almost in a row of people
really?
marveling at Chinese architecture and technology, and I would never have seen that before.